Okay, so today's shiur is Neschus Refuah Shlema for Isser Avram ben Chaya Rachel, who was going through a procedure this morning. He should have a Refuah Shlema Ukreva. Okay. So today's shiur is Matos Masei, and obviously we're in the 3-week period. And Matos Masei, we always read. Thanks. We always read Matos Masei in the 3-week period. So obviously, these parshias speak to us during this period of time when we're trying to do tshuva, bring back the Beis Hamikdash, rectify all of the wrongdoings in ourselves, in the world, to bring the world closer to Mashiach, which is what this whole 3-week period is, culminating in Tisha B'Av. So let's take a look. Okay, so let's take a look. I don't know why I accidentally brought the Sefer in the Parsha. So I'm going to pull up my screen for those of you who are on Zoom. No, not yet. Not yet. That's the very end. If I get there. Okay. So one of the topics in Matos Masei is the Ari Miklat, the person who, and this isn't going to be the topic this year, but it's going to lead into this year. The person who murders accidentally or kills somebody accidentally has to go to the Ari Miklat, the city of refuge, where he stays there and he's protected there from any the Bel Hadam, the person, the avenger from the person's family who we killed, who may want to murder him. And okay, so this is one of the mitzvahs in the parsha. That's Parshas Matos Masei is right at the end of the 40 years of the Midbar. This is right before they are going into Eretz Yisrael, and Hashem commands them to set up, when they go into Eretz Yisrael, to set up these cities of refuge. And then the parsha speaks about if somebody murders intentionally, what the consequence is, and the consequence is, of course, the death penalty if somebody murders intentionally. But what's fascinating in our parsha is, and I brought up these psukim on the screen, so if you are on Zoom, you could see it right in front of you on the screen in pasuk Tes Zayin, Yud Zayin, Yud Tes. 3 different verses, one after the other. So I'm just going to read these verses so you can see sort of what I'm referring to. Im b'kli barzel hiko. If he uses an iron instrument, an instrument of metal, and he strikes somebody, if a man strikes somebody, a person strikes somebody with an instrument of metal, the yamos, and the person dies, then he's a murderer. Umois yamos haratzeach, and the murderer is put to death. And the very next pasuk, im be'evan yad, if he strikes somebody with a stone, the size of a fist, which means a stone that's lethal, asher yamos, and the person dies, yamos ratzeach, a ratzeach, who is a ratzeach, mois yamos ratzeach, and the ratzeach has to die. And then in the next pasuk, oibakli eitz yad, or if he strikes him with a piece of wood, asher yamos, boy, that is lethal. The yamos, and he dies, ratzeachu, mois yamos ratzeach. In other words, the 3 verses repeat each other one after the other. If he strikes him with iron, if he strikes him with a stone, if he strikes him with wood. So the obvious question is, why does the Torah have to? I mean, nothing in the Torah is superfluous. It's the same din. It doesn't make a difference. If you murder somebody with any weapon, or even without a weapon, if you murder somebody and there's witnesses and warnings, etc., you are put to death. Why does the Torah give us 3? If he murders him with iron, he's put to death. If he murders him with a stone, he's put to death. If he murders him with wood, he's put to death. The Torah is not, nothing in the Torah is superfluous. And when the Torah says something that's drawn out like this at great length, when it could have said the exact same thing in one verse, if you strike him with anything and he dies, then you're a murderer, the person's a murderer, and that person is put to death. So why the 3 different verses? Iron, stone, wood, etc. Okay, so that's the question. Obviously, when the Torah does that, the Torah is intimating to us something deeper than just the superficial level. And our job is to figure out what is that something deeper. And the fact that this is during the 3-week period, clearly I would think that that's something deeper has to do with how I should approach this 3-week period, primarily how I can transform myself, or what the message is for me in my own avodas Hashem. Okay. So to understand these three different verses and why the Torah delineates this in iron and stone and in wood, I want to bring a Gemara in Masechtas Matos. And this is in Matos of Yud Beis Amud Aleph, 12a. And the Gemara in Matos, it's one of these Gemaras that is symbolic, sort of allegorical. The Agadata of the Gemara, not the halachic, but sort of the stories. And the Gemara talks about the three mistakes that the Sarei Shel Rome, the Sarei Shel Rome, the angel, the Malach of Rome, will make in the future. The Malach of Rome is the Satan. That's Rashi says, referring to the Satan. So there's three mistakes that the Satan will make in the future when he's trying to escape, I guess, Hashem's wrath during the Messianic redemption. And one mistake is that one of the cities of refuge, one of the Ari Miklat from the mitzvahs in our parsha, as I said, one of the cities of refuge is a city called Betzer. And that the Satan will flee, instead of fleeing to Betzer, he'll flee to a city called Batzra. It's a similar sounding city, but it's the wrong city, and it's not a city of refuge, and he won't be protected there. So that's one mistake that he'll make. The second mistake that he'll make is that the city of refuge only works if you kill accidentally. And the Satan kills intentionally. He's a Malach HaMavis. He kills intentionally, so therefore the Ari Mikla doesn't protect him. That's the second mistake. The third mistake that he'll make is that the Ari Mikla only protects an Adam, only protects a human being, and the Malach, and the Satan is a Malach. So these are the three mistakes the Gemara says that the Satan will make in the future. Now, obviously, this is allegorical and symbolic, and we have to understand what exactly is the Gemara trying to teach us here. Because what does it mean the Satan will make that mistake in the future? All the Satan has to do is open up Makkah, stop Yud Beis Amud Aleph. And the Satan will see. And this Gemara has been learned for 2,000 years. Well, the Satan hasn't learned this Gemara. He doesn't see his mistakes right here. It's like, well, we try to fool the Satan with the extra tekiah. What does that even mean? We're trying to fool the Satan. We do it every single year, and he shouldn't know when Rosh Hashanah is by the extra tekiyahs. Let him look on the Chabad House calendar. He'll see exactly when Rosh Hashanah is. So obviously, when we talk about fooling the Satan, we're not talking about it on a simplistic level. So similarly, and maybe we'll talk about on Rosh Hashanah what that means when we get closer to Rosh Hashanah. So similarly here, when we talk about the Satan making mistakes, we're not talking about it on a simplistic level. So what exactly is that Gemara trying to teach us? That's one question. Question number one. Question number two. There's a medrash in Eicha Rabbah. And Eicha Rabbah says that even though the destruction, the Churban Beis HaMikdash it was a horrific tragedy, and a tragedy that we are still mourning for thousands of years later. But there was a positive element in it, in that Hashem poured his wrath again on the wood and the stones of the Beis HaMikdash, as opposed to pouring his wrath upon Klal Yisrael. So the question is, on Eicha Rabbah, the Beis HaMikdash was made out of wood and stone, but it was also made out of kesef and zav. There was a lot of metal and gold and precious metals in the Beis HaMikdash as well. But Eicha Rabbah only says that Hashem poured his wrath on the stones and on the wood. What about the metal? Why isn't the metal of the Beis HaMikdash not mentioned there? That's question number two. Question number three. There's a Gemara in Maseches Kedushin that says, Im paga b'cha menuvel zeh, that if you will come across this despicable, disgusting entity, meaning the Yetzer Hara, if you come across your own Yetzer Hara, mashcheu lebeis hamedrash, drag him to the Beis HaMedrash. And if he's made of iron, he'll be splintered he'll be shattered into a million pieces. And if he's made of stone, he will dissolve from coming into the Beis HaMedrash. So the question is, what exactly is the Yetzer Hara of iron? What is the Yetzer Hara of stone? How does the Beis HaMedrash help that, etc.? Okay. So in order to understand all of these questions, let's go back to our Gemara in Masechtas Matos. And the Gemara in Masechtas Matos is the three mistakes the Satan will make in the future. And I saw a beautiful explanation about what this means. And again, obviously, it doesn't mean on a simplistic level. What it means is not the three mistakes the Satan himself will make, but it's the three ways in which the Satan makes us make a mistake. in which the Satan tries to trip us. And again, the Satan is our own Yetzer Hara. The Satan is the internal Satan that we all have, our own internal negative inclination, our own Yetzer Hara. There are certain, every one of us has a Yetzer Hara that's tailor-made for us. It knows exactly where our weak spots are. And there are certain devices and tricks and mannerisms in which our own Yetzer Hara strives to pull us away from holiness, from Kedusha, from doing the right thing. And so let's talk, and this is what the Gemara is talking about. So when it says that he flees to Batzra instead of Betzer, that was the first mistake he made. The word Betzer means fortified. It means fortified, like a fortified city. And the word Betzer means, and grammatically, it means something that will be fortified. Batzra means something that is already fortified. So how this is one of the tricks of the Satan, and one of the tricks of the Satan is as follows, that it's critically important, the Alter Rebbe speaks about this in Tanya, that if we are going to grow spiritually, if we are going to ascend spiritually and try to be the best people that we can be, we have to be very cognizant and very self-aware of where our flaws are, where we need extra sort of spiritual strength, where my weak spots are. And therefore I know in those weak areas, and the areas that I'm spiritually weakest are the areas that I have to strengthen. And it's critical to have this self-awareness. And self-awareness is sort of like common sense. It's not so common. And a lot of people go through life with no self-awareness whatsoever. And so it's critical in terms of our spiritual journey to recognize and realize that every sort of time period that we're in has different challenges, different spiritual challenges. The challenges that we have in our 20s is not the same that we have in our 30s, which is not the same that we have in our 50s, which is not the same that we have in our 70s. We always are having new and constant challenges. And the more we grow spiritually, the more new challenges arise. And so it's critically important that we recognize and know where those challenges are that we have individually and where we have to strengthen ourselves. And one of the things that the sort of tachbelis or tricks of our own Yetzer Hara of the Satan is that he tells us, you're already fortified. You already know where your weak spots are. You don't have to fortify yourself in other areas. You don't have to strengthen yourself in other areas. And this is what it means that he runs to Batzra instead of Betzer. Betzer means already fortified. But he runs to Batzra. He tries to convince us, Betzer means will be fortified. But he runs to Batzra. He tries to convince us, you're already fortified. You already have all of the self-awareness. You don't have to strengthen yourself any greater or any more. And this isn't true. This is a way to trip and fall spiritually. We have to constantly recognize where my weak spots are and constantly fortify myself, strengthen myself, go to shiurim or mitzvahs, whatever it may be, strengthen myself in the weak areas. And the Satan convinces us, you don't have to strengthen yourself in those weak areas. That's Betzer versus Batzra. He runs to Batzra. He tries to convince us we're already fortified. And then what was the next one? That he makes a mistake because the Ari Mikvah, the city of refuge, only works for those who kill accidentally, and he kills intentionally. And one of the tricks of the Satan is to tell us, the shogeg and mazid, accidental versus intentional, you sinned intentionally. You know you sinned intentionally. You knew what you were doing and you did it anyway. You are too far gone. You are worthless spiritually. There's no hope for you. If you sin accidentally, there's hope. But the Satan convinces us that we sinned b'mazid. Because we did sin b'mazid. None of us are perfect. We're all flawed. We all make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes are intentional. Sometimes we sort of lose our spiritual equilibrium and we act in a manner that we're not proud of. And then the Satan points to that and says, you have no hope. And this is one of the tricks of the Satan, because the moment we feel we have no hope, we lose hope, we cease to grow spiritually, and the Satan has become victorious. So these are ways, not that the Satan himself is fooled, but how the Satan fools us. So these aren't mistakes that he makes. These are mistakes that he tries to induce within us. Number one, Batzer and Betzer, that we don't have to fortify ourselves. Number two, that we sinned intentionally. We're spiritually worthless. We have no value. We're not capable of changing. This is who we are. And then number three, that it only protects an Adam, and he's a Malach. And this is the Yetzer Hara the other way. The Yetzer Hara tries to convince you, you're a Malach. You don't need any changing. You never make any mistakes. This sort of, and again, there's an extreme to this, the sort of narcissistic a person that never can admit he's wrong, that could never admit he made a mistake. After all, he's a Malach. He doesn't make any mistakes. But if you feel you never make any mistakes, if you feel you're never wrong, you literally close the doors of tshuva. So this is again another sort of trick of the Yetzer Hara, another mistake that he tries to induce within us. Again, on an extreme level, it's sort of this narcissistic attitude that I'm never wrong. But on a non-extreme level, one that we all sort of succumb to is we rationalize and we convince ourselves and we justify our negative behavior. All of that is tricks of the Satan. So this is what the Gemara is talking about. La'asi, the Satan will make these mistakes. These are the mistakes that he tries to constantly induce within us. Number one, go to review them again. Number one, I'm already fortified. I don't need any more spiritual fortification. I may have my flaws, but I fortified those flaws. Number two, that I'm spiritually worthless because I sinned intentionally. And number three, I have no flaws at all. I rationalize what I do. I'm a Malach. I'm perfect. These are the three. And so these three ways, these are three areas that we all have to strengthen within ourselves. Number one, we all have to recognize that we have to continually fortify ourselves. We have to continually strengthen ourselves spiritually in our journey for spiritual growth. Number two, we have to recognize even when we stumble, and even when we make a mistake, and even when we fall, and even when we sin, the doors of tshuva are always open. Even if we sinned intentionally, we can do tshuva for that. This is a fundamental pillar of Judaism. We can continue our journey of spiritual growth. Hashem did not make us perfect and doesn't expect perfection from us. But what he expects from us and what he wants from us is to continue our journey. Even when we fall, we get back up. And then number three, not to justify and rationalize our own negativity. And certainly not to be one of those who never makes any mistakes, who is never wrong. Because a person who believes he's never wrong, a person who believes they never make a mistake is a person who can never grow. Because you're stuck right there. You're at perfection there. So these are the sort of tachbelis, the tricks that the Satan tries to induce within us. And each one of these represents the barzel, the rock, and the eitz, the three weapons that it speaks about in Parshas Masei that bring about death. And the reason why it's spoken about in three different psukim is these are three different areas that the Satan, that the Yetzer Hara tries to induce death within us. Death is spiritual disconnection. So let's take a look, for example. Let's take a look. The betzer that need to be fortified, that we have to fortify ourselves. This is the Yetzer Hara. This is represented by barzel, by iron. Because iron is fortified. Iron represents strength. So this when the pus be in the room. Sorry. So when the pasuk speaks about that, if you killed somebody with an iron, it's talking about it's not just talking about simplistic. When the Yetzer Hara tries to kill you with iron, when the Yetzer Hara tries to tell you you're already fortified, this is represented by barzel. And then we have the shogeg and mazid, where the Satan tells you you're worthless. This is Evan. This is the stone. Why? If you look in today's Tehillim, in Kapitel Kuf Yud Ches, I think it is 118, and we say it in Halal. Evan Hamasu Abaynim L'Reish Pina. The Haisa L'Reish Pina. The rock that was despised by the builders. David HaMelech is talking about Am Yisrael. He's referring to Am Yisrael. The rock that was despised by the builders, the nation that was despised by the rest of the world. Haisa L'Reish Pina becomes the cornerstone, the foundation of the entire world. So David HaMelech is talking about Klal Yisrael. But Evan Hamasu, the rock that is despised, the rock that is dejected. So the Evan represents the dejection The Evan Amasu, the rock that's dejected, our own dejection of ourselves, our own rejection of ourselves. That's the Yitzhar of Evan. That's when the Yitzhar tries to murder us, tries to bring us down through the Evan, through telling us that we're worthless, that we're not worthy of spiritual growth, that I sinned intentionally. And then we have the ego, the I'm a malach, the malach versus Adam. That's the eights. That is the tree that grows high represents the ego. That's lofty, that grows high. That's the Yitzhar of eights, that I'm of wood, that I'm perfect, that I don't need any change. That's the Yitzhar of ego. So the Yitzhar of Barzel tells me I'm already fortified. The Yitzhar of stone tells me I'm worthless. The Yitzhar of eights tells me I'm perfect already. All of these are three different tricks, and this is what Parshas Masei is teaching us. And it's reasons why it's three different verses and not just one verse, because it's talking about three. It's trying to stretch it out to show us. It's not just talking about the simplistic shot of the pasuk, that if a person murders, they get murdered. Because it doesn't matter what the weapon is. The reason why it's three different verses is because the Torah is trying to intimate there's something deeper here. There is something more powerful here. And these three ways of murder are not just three ways that one human being murders another, but it's the three ways that our inner Yetzirah tries to murder us, so to speak, tries to bring death upon us. Meaning, what is death? Death is spiritual disconnection. The way that we become spiritually disconnected is either through iron, through barzel. I'm already fortified enough. I don't need to protect myself anymore spiritually. Or the Yitzhar of Evan, I'm worthless. I'm the Evan Amasu. I'm the rejected stone. Our eights, I'm a malach. I'm perfect already. My ego tells me I don't need any change whatsoever. So this is what Parshas Masei is telling us, and this is why this is read during the 3 weeks, because these are the areas that we have to strengthen within ourselves. It is specifically in this time, in this 3-week period, that we have to refortify our own weaknesses, that we have to strengthen our own weaknesses and not say I'm already fortified. To the contrary, we have to constantly look where I can strengthen myself. And part of the 3-week period is recognizing I'm not the Evan Amasu. I'm not a dejected Hashem, even though it's been 2,000 years of Golos. Hashem hasn't rejected us. He hasn't rejected me. To the contrary, every mitzvah that I do has incredible and profound power and strength. And the spiritual revolutions that every positive action that I bring to the world, what that accomplishes is incredible, beyond what I could fathom. It's critical, especially during this time period, to recognize that my one mitzvah could bring back the Beis HaMikdash. So the Yitzhar tells us, no, you're Evan Amasu, you're rejected. That's the Yitzhar of Evan. Rise above that, especially during this time period. And of course, during this time period, we have to subdue our own egos. We know the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed through sinas chinam, through baseless hatred amongst the Jewish people. What is the root cause of sinas chinam? Is ego. So these are the 3 areas, Barzel, Evan, eights. These are the 3 areas that the Yitzhar tries to sort of deceive me, bring me spiritual disconnection, and specifically in the 3, we have to work on these 3 a whole year, but specifically during this time period of the 3-week period, I have to work specifically on these 3. This is our Aveda. Fortify myself, recognize my own spiritual power, and subdue my own ego, and eliminate any sinas chinam that exists. And now, when we understand that, we could also understand the Eicha Rabbah. Remember, Eicha Rabbah, the Hashem says, the Medrash says that Hashem poured His wrath on the eights and on the avadim, on the eights and on the avadim, on the stones, the wood and the stones. And it doesn't mention iron there. It doesn't mention the metal. It doesn't mention the kesef and the zav. Why not? Because the cause of the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, it says in the Gemara, was that the Jews were involved in the 3 big sins of murder, Gilui Arayos, Avodah Zarah, and the Jews had tremendous shame about themselves. They were suffering from the Yitzhar of Evan, of that they're worthless. After all, they're engaged in these terrible averas, and they started feeling about themselves. They're a worthless nation. They're just like all the other nations that succumb to these terrible sins. And the Klal Yisrael is nothing special. After all, they're involved in murder and Gilui Arayos and in Avodah Zarah. This was the cause of the first Beis Hamikdash, the Yetzer Hara of Evan. And what was the cause of the second Beis Hamikdash? The Yetzer Hara of Eitz, of ego, of narcissism, of sinas chinam, of baseless hatred amongst the Jews. So the Yetzer Hara of Evan and the Yetzer Hara of Eitz were the cause of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash and the second Beis Hamikdash. That's why it says Hashem poured his wrath on the stones and on the wood of the Beis Hamikdash. It doesn't mention the metal of the Beis Hamikdash because it's referring to not just the physical stones and the physical wood. It's referring to the Yetzer Hara of stone, which is the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, and the Yetzer Hara of Eitz, of ego, of sinas chinam, which was the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. That explains Eicha Rabbah. And now we could also understand the Gemara and Kedushin, that if you come across your Yetzer Hara, drag him to the Beis Medrash. And what does it say? If he's metal, he's barzel. We already know already. If he's metal, he'll be smashed into a million pieces. If he's stone, he'll dissolve. Why? Because when you learn Torah, the more you learn Torah, when you come into the Beis HaMedrash, you recognize it'll completely shatter the Yetzer Hara of barzel. What is the Yetzer Hara of barzel? I don't need to fortify myself. I'm already fortified. The more we learn Torah, the more I connect to Torah, the more I recognize I do need to strengthen myself. That does help me strengthen myself. And that makes me recognize that the areas that need to be strengthened. Similarly, if he's stone, he'll be dissolved. It's the Yetzer Hara of stone, that I'm worthless, that I'm the Evan Amasu, I'm the rejected stone. But when I learn Torah, that infuses me with the recognition of what my soul is and the spiritual power and strength that I have. And that's why it doesn't mention, what if it's a Yetzer Hara of wood, of ego? And the reason why it doesn't mention that, it only mentions if it's barzel, if the Yetzer Hara is made of barzel, it'll be shattered into a million pieces. Because Torah has the capacity to empower me to recognize the areas I need to be fortified. If it's stone, it'll be dissolved because the Torah is the refuah for the Yetzer Hara of stone. The Yetzer Hara of stone is the Evan Amasu. I'm rejected. I'm worthless. When I learn Torah, I realize that's not true. But the Yetzer Hara of Eitz, it doesn't speak about. You know why? Because the Gemara says there's one person who Torah doesn't help. That he could learn Torah, as much Torah, and this Torah, he actually, not only does the Torah not help him, but he transforms the Torah to poison. And it says that's a person who learns Torah with ego. A person who learns Torah with ego, the Gemara says, the Torah becomes a sama mavis, the elixir of poison, a poisonous elixir. So in other words, you take the Torah, and when you learn it with ego, it doesn't transform you. Because you feel you don't need to be transformed. You feel you don't need any change. You feel you don't need any help. So therefore, not only does the Torah not transform you, but when you learn Torah with ego, you take all that spiritual energy and it becomes negative spiritual energy. So therefore, the Gemara in Kedushin only mentions the Yetzer Hara of barzel and the Yetzer Hara of stone, and not the Yetzer Hara of wood. Fascinating how it all fits together. And now, here, pass these out. Let's see if we could, here, let's take one. I'm going to share the screen to a pasuk in Bereshis, where I think this shiur is elucidated even further. If you take a look, and this is the story of Gan Eden, okay, and I underlined where I want you to look. And in pasuk Beis, this is the story of the serpent and Chava in Gan Eden, and the serpent is trying to convince Chava again. The serpent is, of course, the Yetzer Hara, the Satan. This is we all have that serpent within us. And the serpent is trying to convince Chava to eat of the tree. And the serpent asks her, did Hashem say not to eat from any of these trees? And look at Pasuk Beis. V'tema isha el nachash. This is the first words that Chava speaks to the Nachash. No, Hashem said we can eat from all the trees, just not the middle tree. Just not this tree, but the very first letter of the very first word that Chava speaks is the letter Mem. Okay? Hold on to that for a second. Go to Pasuk Vav. In Pasuk Vav is what happens when she actually sins. Okay? She sees, right? V'tera isha ki teva esam eichel. She sees that it's good, the fruit is good. Ki sava hileinayim. She desires it. The nechma the eitz lahastil. She wants this fruit to make her smarter. Now look at these words. V'tikach mepirio, she takes the fruit. V'teichel, she eats it. V'titein gam leisha ima, she gives it to her husband. And the next word, vatipachna einei shneim, and their eyes are opened in shame. They recognize that they are naked. Now, if you look at those four words, the tikach, this is the result of her sin. This is the action of the sin. The tikach, she takes it. The teichel, she eats it. The titain, she gives it. The tipachna, and her eyes are open. Each one of those words start with vav saf. If you take the mem of her first letter, so this is the Zohar. The Zohar says this, that the Satan took the mem of the first word that she spoke and connected it to these four words. The vav saf. Mem vav saf is mavis, is death. And if there's 4 times, the Zohar says, the Satan brought upon death 4 different times. 4 times death, right? Because the mem, and then the 4 words here. The tikach, the teichel, the titain, the tipach. So the chedushi harim, and that's what the Zohar says. What's the 4 times? Why is the 4 times? What's the 4 times death? The Zohar doesn't explain what's the 4 times. The 4 times mavis. But the chedushi harim, the first Ger Rebbe, quoted by his grandson, the Sfas Emes. So the chedushi harim says that when somebody sins, there's 4. The 4 times is there's 4 different elements to the sin. He says the first element is, when you sin, you're stealing, because Hashem gave us the world. The world belongs to Hashem, and Hashem gave it to us for a purpose, for a reason. And when we utilize the world and go against the purpose for which the owner gave it to us, we're stealing the resources of the world for our own sin. That, he says, is symbolized by the word the tikach. She took. She's stealing from the eights, from Hashem, because she's doing the opposite of Hashem's ratzon with it. The next one is the action of the sin itself. V'teichel, she eats. That's the action of the sin. The next element of the sin is the influence, the negative influence that it has on those around you. The titain gam leisha, she gave it to her husband. The titain is the influence on those around you. And then the 4th element of the sin is the shame that you feel after the sin, the tipachna. So the 4 elements of mavis are the 4 elements of sin. The stealing, because you're taking from the world, the action of the sin itself, the influence, the negative influence that it has on others, and the shame that you feel after it's over. These are the 4 elements in every sin. Every sin involves these 4 elements. And that's every sin is the Satan takes the mem from Machava's words and adds it to these 4 elements. The tikach, the teichel, the titen, the tipachna. So the mem is added to the vav saf of those 4 words and brings mavis. But there's something even deeper than that. Because but it still isn't answered. Why the 4? What's the 4 representative of? Okay, the 4 elements of sin, but it's even deeper. Because 4 times mem is what represents the mavis here. 4 times mem is 160, right? Mem is 40. So 4 times mem is 160. 160 is gematria 8s. 160 is gematria sela, stone. And 160 is gematria kesef, metal. The 4 times the mem represents the 3 ways that the Yetzer Hara tries to destroy us. The 3 ways the Yetzer Hara tries to induce the sin upon us. The Yetzer Hara of 8, the Yetzer of that I'm narcissistic, that I rationalize my own sin, that I don't need any help. The Yetzer Hara of sela, that I'm worthless, that I'm no good, that I'm beyond repair. And the Yetzer Hara of barzel, of kesef, that I'm already fortified. I don't need any help. So this is all the way back to Gan Eden. Here we have something that connects us all the way to in Parshas Masei, that the 3 times the Torah speaks about the murder of a human being, it's 1 in 8, 1 in Evan, 1 in barzel, because these are the 3 ways the Yetzer Hara tries to induce us to sin. And therefore, specifically in this time period, in the time period of the 3 weeks, what Parshas Masei is telling us, these are the areas that we have to strengthen within ourselves. It is specifically in this time period that every one of us has to recognize we have to fortify ourselves, we have to strengthen ourselves spiritually. Every one of us has to recognize the power of every mitzvah that I do, and the power of every shiur that I go to, and the power of every tehillim that I say, and the power of every act of kindness, that my one mitzvah, as the Rambam says, could tip the scale and bring Mashiach. But if I feel I'm an Evan Amasu, if I feel dejected and rejection, I'm not going to think that. And I'm not going to engage in that positive action. And then the Yetzer Hara of 8. Every one of us has to recognize that no matter how lofty and spiritual we may be, all of us need Hashem's help. All of us need, there's areas in every one of us that need to be corrected. And none of us should ever think, hey, I've reached the spiritual finish line. The reaching the spiritual finish line means I'm no longer growing. And so the Yetzer Hara of 8 tells you, you don't have to grow anymore. You're perfect. But it's specifically in this time period, in the 3-week time period, that we have to grow. Because if the fact that the Beis HaMikdash is not here is the biggest proof that we haven't finished our job yet, that I have not reached my completion yet, that I have not reached the purpose of why I was created yet. So in Parshas Masei, we're given, in the psukim about one man murdering another, we're actually given a very deep message about our own spiritual growth in this time period. And so Amir Tzashem, if every one of us will guard ourselves from these 3 areas that the Yetzer Hara tries to induce within us, to try to induce death or spiritual disconnection within us, this is the pathway. Parshas Masei is giving us the pathway to bring about the ultimate redemption. Recognize I need to correct myself, recognize there's areas I need to change, recognize my own spiritual power, recognize that I have to fortify myself. And when I do that, in this time period specifically, I'm fulfilling the mandate that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us in Parshas Masei, to continue to grow, to continue to recognize my spiritual power, to continue to spiritually fortify myself. And Amir Hashem, through doing that and through living that and through internalizing the message, every one of us has the power. Each one of us individually has the power to bring about the opposite of the 3 weeks, the opposite of Avelis, the greatest simcha that we are all waiting for, so that ultimately the 3-week period will be transformed from a period of Avelis. And we know that Tisha B'Av, we don't say Tachnun because Tisha B'Av is called a Moed. Even though it's bizarre, how could Tisha B'Av be called a Moed? And the Navi calls Tisha B'Av a Moed. And there's lots of different explanations as to why, but one of the reasons is because the greatest celebration, the greatest Moed for the Jewish people will be on Tisha B'Av when Mashiach comes, and Tisha B'Av will be transformed from a day of mourning and a day of Kinnis and a day of Avelis to the day of the greatest Suda, the Suda of Leviathan, the Suda of Mashiach Zikenu, and the greatest is Galus of Elokus, revelation of Elokus, with the coming of Mashiach Zikenu, B'Imheir V'Yemenu, Amen. Okay, so let's, I don't know if any of that made sense at all, or you were able to follow along. Did that work? Okay, so let's do Tehillim, as we always end off with Tehillim, for the protection of our soldiers in the IDF, and the hostages, for the release of the hostages, and for the safety and security of Eretz Yisrael, of Achenu be'Eretz Yisrael, and Achleisenu be'Eretz Yisrael, and wherever they may be all over the world. 121. Shir Lamaloi Sesenoi Hari Miyayin Yavoy Ezri Mi Madinoi Ois Eshamayim Biaret Ayi Tenamoi Raglecha Ayanim Shem Recha Ki Nelayanim Leishan Shem Yisrael Adinoi Shem Recha Neitzilcha Ayad Yaminecha Yem Mashemesh Leikacha Viareach Balayla Adinoi Yishmarcha Mikara Yishmeres Nafshecha. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And Amir Hashem, we'll see everybody next week. Thank you, everybody online. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Susan. Thank you so much. Yes.